We're looking at the first parak in Parshas Chaya, basically the entire episode in which Abraham purchases a burial place for his wife. She dies either at the beginning of this week's parsha or at the end of the past week's parsha. Shalom Aleichem. Yes. So, certain questions you might have while you're looking through it, I can imagine it's something that the Ramban deals with very well. As we mentioned in the first week, that one of the Ramban's purposes of his commentary, he wants to go out of his way to make clear that everything that we're having in the Torah, particularly with regards to the stories of the Avos, why those stories are relevant to us, why they matter, why they were fit to be placed in the Torah. So this is an example of one of those stories where you might not have the best idea at first glance as to why we have so much detail in it. If you take a look, there's a whole back and forth between Abraham first speaking to the Bnei Ches, people that lived in that land, asking them for a residence and a place for him to bury his wife. And then they say, sure, no problem. We view you as a leader of us, a king. God has established you as a prince in our midst. And then he entreats them, please not only give me a piece of land, I want something specific, and I'd like for you to argue on my behalf. Not argue, but to ask on my behalf to Ephron Hachiti. Ask him if I can have as a burial plot a piece of his land that I'm willing to pay for. And so then there's a whole exchange between him and Ephron, where Ephron wants to give it for free. He says, what's the big deal? Just a little bit of money between guys like you and me. We're both very wealthy. And Abraham still insists. He wants to make sure to pay in full for the amount he does, and then he eventually gets the Maras Machpelah, which is in Hebron, which is a popular tourist attraction nowadays as well, that Sarah is buried in, as well as the rest of the Avos. So that's the entire story, and we could have just left off with, you think, the first pasuk, Avram's wife Sarah dies, and Avram buried Sarah, and that's the end of the story. Right? It seems to be going at length about an episode which doesn't seem particularly relevant to us. So the Ramban is going to tackle that problem, as well as many others. And another thing that the Ramban does that's going to come out in what we're about to learn is the Ramban is very interested in, describing how things worked out in the world prior to Matan Torah. That you have a lot of episodes in the Torah where there's a certain system of laws or assumptions that aren't so clear to us because we have a different set of laws and different set of assumptions with the way we work in the world, that we have the Torah and everything like that. So Ramban describes how things worked prior to that point in time. So here he makes sure to do so. If you look in the first entry we have, so in Pasuk Daled, the Ramban says, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem, commenting on the part of the verse where Avraham Avinu says, I am just a foreigner, a stranger in your land among you. So Ramban says, Haya haminhag liyos lahem batei kavaros. The custom of the time, back then, in Abraham's days, was that you had, burial plots. Ish leveis havosav. These were family plots, something that we have even nowadays, right? You have families that generally try to be buried together. Ish leveis havosav, right? Through the family. V'sadek fura echad yikru bo kol hagimim. And you'd have a general field in a given city, wherever it was, where you would bury more of a general cemetery for people that were strangers to the land, people that weren't there in a permanent way, they passed away. So we had a more general plot, a bigger cemetery, I suppose. V'hinei Avraham amar el b'nei Ches. Abraham says to the children of Ches, Ani ger me'eretz acheres. I'm a foreigner from another land. Right? Abraham doesn't originally come from Eretz Canaan. V'anchalti mi'avosi beis hakvaros be'eretz hazos. Avraham Avinu is explaining, I never actually had a family plot here because I'm new to this place. Yeah. But now I've been living with you guys. I've been living here for many years. It's my desire to live here permanently. That's what Hashem promised me and for my generations. So please, I'm requesting of you, please give me a burial area from among one of your lands that you guys own. So the Ramban notes that the way Abraham asks, the way he makes his request, he says, Tanu, please give to me. Right? So the Ramban picks up on this, and he notes, Chashvu shebikesh osa mehem b'matana. The Bnei Ches, when they first heard Avraham Avinu's request, they assumed that what that meant was Avraham was asking for a gift. Give me land for free. They said, Avraham Avinu, you're not considered, Avraham was very well known at this point, so you're not considered a stranger among us anymore. Rather, you're a king. God anointed you as a prince among us. Us and our land, it is totally subservient to you. Take any plot of land that you'd like. Bury your dead there. And then that should be a permanent burial estate for you forever. We're not going to try and stop you. So the Ramban's approach is basically, it's very different from Rashi. If you take a look at Rashi, the way Rashi explains things here by Ger v'Toshav, Rashi says that Avram's kind of being actually a little intimidating. Rashi says, I'll just say it outside, he says, Ger, I'm a foreigner. If you guys want to give me land as a free gift, because I'm a foreigner, I'm not really deserving of it, fine. I'm happy with that. But if not that, v'Toshav, know that I've settled here. This is the land that God promised me, and I'm going to claim the right to it no matter what. And Rashi's approach seems to be a little bit difficult to read into the words here, because if you're trying to entreat the Bnei Ches, even if he might be right, even if God did in fact promise him the land, that's not something that the rest of the world has acknowledged at this point. And it's not going to win you points by saying, and God gave me this land, so I'm going to take it no matter what. The Ramban says that basically what Avraham Avinu is doing here is that he's explaining, listen, within your system, I don't live here, I'm not from here originally, and that's why I don't have anything, I'm asking for a favor. And they respond, say, for sure, we would love to give it to you. Right? So he's just setting the stage here for what's going on. But what's important is that he just laid down the groundwork of how how burial was accustomed to. What's the word I'm looking for? How burial was done back then. That you had family fields and you had a field of an entire city for the strangers of the land. So Abraham, what does it seem like he's asking here? If you see how the psukim are going to continue. Right? What does Avraham Avinu ask for? Not just a regular burial plot. How many people here have been to Maras HaMachpelah? Right, so does it seem like a standard family plot? Just with regards to size, with regards to stature? It seems like something much larger. It seems like a much bigger deal as to what Avraham Avinu is asking for. So, keeping that in mind, it colors this request a little bit. This isn't just like anyone asking for a favor, anyone asking for your standard plot of land. Avram's asking for something significantly more, and it wasn't even something that the people back in those days were used to. That you had a family plot and maybe a general plot for the entire population, but never that one person could just request, I'd like to have an entire cemetery. It's something that's a very strange concept, a very strange request to make. So, in the next pasuk, Ramban I think stresses this a little bit. So Abraham says, and the Ramban is going to make an emphasis on each word as it's being used in the pasuk here. So Abraham says, if it appeases you, please allow me to bury my deceased that is before me. That is before me seems a little extra. So Ramban explains, Ta'amo, the reason behind Abraham's using this word, Ani lo ekbor mesi mikever acher. I am not choosing to bury my dead anywhere else. I'm sticking with this place. This is what I really want. If you guys desire that I can bury my dead here, piguli be'Ephraim. So please entreat Ephraim for me. Ephraim has a certain field, a certain cave in the corner of his field. And like we said before, I don't have anything for myself. Sorry, how does that read? This is not I'm not asking for. Ephraim is not using this as a family burial plot at all. He's using it just as a field. It's just in general a field. So, what's going on here is Ephraim is asking for something much greater, and it's from property that's already owned by someone else, and it's not being used as a burial plot for anyone else. So Ephraim's saying it's justified. It wouldn't be too much of a big deal for me to ask for this, but at the same time, it is. Right? What we're dealing with is somebody asking for an entire cemetery field. The Tamil Fanai, the next Rambani says, and why does Abraham mention from the mace, the dead that is before me? If you don't do so, if you don't give me this land, my only other option is not to go somewhere else and bury Sarah, but it's to put her in a casket. If you have, I think, what do they call it in cemeteries where they have a tomb, but I think the whole structure that's above ground, a mausoleum, right? So Abraham is threatening that he's going to use that. It's not so clear why he can do that if we assume that let's say the Avos kept the Torah, so we generally frown upon that with regards to burial practices. So it could be that he was just bluffing. He's saying, if you don't give me this land, I'm going to put Sarah in a mausoleum. But it might be something, he might actually mean this. Whatever he's saying, he seems very determined Sorry? I think we're all out. So Avram Avinu is saying, I'm very determined. Either give me this land, or I'm going to bury Sarah in, not in a burial plot. Oh yeah, Tamo. Another possibility. The Ramban says the reason that Abraham emphasizes milfanai, that this dead is before me. Messiah, Mesi asher hu lefanai va'ani tzarich l'mayar lekavra. My dead is before me, and therefore I have to hurry in burying her. We're going to learn, I think, a lot of laws about burial are learned from this entire story. One of them is from this idea that in general in Jewish law we try to hurry up a burial. Right? It's not considered a kavod. It's not considered an honorable thing for a mace to just leave it there. Sometimes we have other concerns that we want to have more people come to the funeral, so maybe we'll delay for that reason. But our main focus is on the kavod of the mace and the kavod of the deceased. And here this would be an example of where Avram is mentioning, this mace is milfanai, it's before me, I really have to get this done already. So he's kind of adding a sense of urgency here. Okay, now, if we go on to the next part of the Ramban, he says, V'tam ufiguli, what's the reason that Abraham asks in the verse, you look at, he says, please entreat Ephron for me. Why doesn't Abraham go to Ephron himself? Why does he ask the people of town to consult Ephron and ask him on Abraham's behalf to get the land? Ki haya Ephron asher v'nichbad. Ephron was a very wealthy, honorable man in the community there. Kasher Amar, as he says later on in the story, Beini uvenecha mahi, right? Ephron says later on, what's 400, I think, what was the amount? 400 shkalim, right? So Ephron says, what's 400 shkalim between a guy like you and me? He's trying to communicate, Abraham, I'm rich like you, what do we need to go through all this financial exchange for? Let me just give you the land as a gift. But from there you see very clearly that Ephron was a wealthy, honorable man. It wouldn't be an honorable thing to him for him to sell the land of his forefathers. As you have concerning in Malachim Aleph, there's a story with Navos. There's a man that Achav, the king, he wants to have a field that's next door to his for his own convenience, and he confronts this guy Navos. He asks, let me buy your field from you, and Navos says, I'm not giving it up, because even though you're offering me a very nice sum for it, you're the king, you have wealth. At the same time, for a person, certainly back then, and I think in some ways nowadays also, it's considered it has sentimental value. It's, to have your field. It's something that you got from your family and they got from their family beforehand. It's just constantly passed down from generation to generation. So Navos didn't want to give it up, and same thing here. Abraham is asking for a very big favor from Ephron. And because Ephron's a rich guy, this isn't something where you could just bribe him and say, let me buy your field for millions of dollars. That's not going to help. Ephron's already rich. He has everything he needs. This field that we're dealing with right now, this is something that is really just a matter of Ephron's kavod to be able to give it up. And again, like we said, Abraham's asking for a very big favor. He's saying, you have a tremendous estate, you have a huge backyard, and you probably don't need it, but at the same time, he's asking to build a cemetery there. It's a very strange request, and it would demand a lot for a person to say yes to that. You don't want to have a cemetery in your backyard. And certainly here also there's an issue of the fact that the land belongs to his family, and it's not something he wants to part with so easily. So the Ramban says, Al-Kain lo halach Abraham alav l'harbos lo machir hasadeh. Therefore Abraham himself did not personally go to Ephron to offer him a price for the field. He needed to do more. He needed some political clout here in order to get this field. He asked the people of town who we saw earlier acknowledge Avram Avinu as being a man of great stature. They view him as a king over them. So he's saying, if you guys really like me, if you really want to do me a favor, please, on my behalf, ask Ephron for me. When you guys all come as a group, that's going to convince him much more easily than all the money that I could possibly offer him for this place. Okay, but why exactly did Abraham want this kever? Any idea why? There is something special about Maras HaMachpelah.
Isn't that where Adam and Eve?
Right. Very good. So that's what we're going to get into, and we have to figure out why that's going to be so important. But let's just read the Ramban where he discusses this.
Is that not known to the other people that Adam and Eve?
So the Ramban will discuss this right now, and if it was, you would think that that'd be a historical landmark. That would be something that everybody would view as with tremendous importance, and you would never want to give that up. No matter how many people come over to you and tell you, "Come on, get the land to Avram," we wouldn't want to do that. But the Ramban explains Maras HaMachpelah, the Machpelah cave. Right. So Lashon Rashi, he quotes Rashi first. Bayis v'aliyah al gabav. Why is it called Machpelah? The doubled cave. Kefel means double. So the reason why it's called that is because it was 2 stories. essentially. And if you look, Maras Machpelah is very tall. I think there are 2 levels to it. So that's how Rashi describes how it got the name. Davar Acher, another possibility, Rashi says, Shekfula Bezugos, that it is doubled with pairs, that it's 2 times 2. It has 4 in total, 4 different pairs of people there. And I think in the English translation here, it describes who those are. It's Adam and Chava, and each of the Avos with their wives. Ve'einenu nachon. So the Ramban says Rashi is incorrect. Ki akasav amar sedei Ephron asher b'machpelah. It describes at another point in this whole parsha. It says that we have the field of Ephron that was in the entire town. The town's name was Machpelah. It wasn't that the burial plot itself was called Machpelah. So he says V'hinehu shem hamakom asher bo hasada. That's the name of the town that the kever was located in. Ve'ein tzarich levakesh tam l'shem hamakomos. Concerning the reason for a name behind the town itself, that we don't need to worry about. That's, I don't know, there was some reason why they called the town Machpelah, but it doesn't concern us. Nevertheless, the Ramban also does quote Bereshis Rabbi, which says the idea that we've mentioned. So Bereshis Rabbi Amru, in the Midrash, Chazal told us, Shekafal HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kol Masor Shel Adam Harishon, the cover B'Sofa, that the reason why it's called Machpelah, that it's Ketel, doubled over, is because HaKadosh Baruch Hu took Adam Harishon, and to bury him, Adam Harishon was very tall. That's another thing that the Midrashim point out. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to fold Adam Harishon essentially in order to bury him in that place, and that's why it's called the doubled over place. Va'al datam, concerning their opinion of Chazal, haya kol hamakom ahu nikrakein me'olam, v'him lo yadu ta'amo. Right, if it's called Machpelah just because of Adam Harishon and not because of all of the Avos and Imos, right? So that means that this name is what exists. This is what it was called even prior to Abraham buying it, right? If we're saying that it's called Maras HaMachpelah because of the Avos and Imos, so you have 2 times 2 groups of pairs that are living there, so it wouldn't be called that until much later. And you would say, I guess the Torah is taking a little bit of a historical perspective when it's actually describing this. You have that sometimes in the Torah where they'll describe the name of a certain place based on future events that don't take place until after that narrative. But Moshe Rabbeinu, he's writing the Torah at a time where those events already happened, so he's describing it in the way that he knows it to be. Right? So you could have said that here. You could have said, it's called Maras HaMachpelah because all of the Avos and Imos being buried there. The Ramban is saying, no, it was called Machpelah because of what had already happened, and that's what everybody called it up until that point. Like you mentioned, everyone you would think would know about this. Adam Harishon was buried there, and that's how it got its name. So he described.
It had its name before the Avos were buried.
Why?
Because he's asking it becomes at this point in the story, there's nobody buried there except that.
Right. So what you could have said, and I think this is probably the perspective that Rashi would be taking here, is that Moshe Rabbeinu, when he's writing the Torah, he's calling it Maras HaMachpelah in the narrative because Moshe Rabbeinu himself knows already that location has all those people there, even though at the time of the narrative itself they weren't all there yet.
So Abraham doesn't refer to it by that name.
Right. It would. Right. If you were to ask, according to Rashi, if you were to ask Moshe Rabbeinu, what did they call it at the time that Abraham was actually purchasing it, he'd say they probably called it something else. Everyone's cave, whatever they called it, right? But the Ramban is bringing this medrash that
so Abraham did ask specifically Machpelah, he didn't use that term when he asked.
According to Rashi, I would think that he wouldn't, right? It would that's a name that is due to later historical events, so that name probably didn't exist yet.
And nobody knew that Adam and Eve were buried there?
So the Ramban's about to talk about that. So where are we? Yeah. So he says. So Ramban says va'al datam. It's still on that first line in that paragraph. I think it's a separate paragraph. Va'al datam haya kol hamakom ahu nikra kein me'olam. According to the opinion of the people writing Bereshis Rabbah, Chazal, they felt that this name was attached to this place ever since Adam Harishon was buried. V'him lo yadu ta'amo. But they, the people that lived in the area, the people that lived in Machpelah, in that city, they didn't know the reason why it was called that. You know, sometimes you have customs of a certain town or names of a certain town that were there for a reason, but over time people forget about it. And so the Ramban is claiming that's what happened here. The location was originally named the Machpelah because of Adam Harishon being buried there, but as time went on, the people that lived there totally forgot that was the reason why it was called that, and they had no idea that Adam Harishon was buried in the place Avram Avinu was trying to purchase. It seems that Ephron was totally willing to sell it. He wasn't aware of the fact that this land had that significance, and he sold it for a standard value. V'hinei Avraham lo haya mevakesh rak limkor lo hama'ara. And if you look in the Psukim, you actually take a more careful look. When Avraham makes his original request, he asks for the ma'ara. He asks for the cave, specifically. And later on, the Bnei Ches and Ephron himself, they offer Avraham not only the cave, but the field surrounding it as well. Right? But Avraham originally only asked for the cave. Kihi bekatza hasadeh, that was at the end of Ephron's field, the Yishar hasadeh le'Ephron. Avraham didn't want to impose too much on Ephron. He said, I just want that cave. I don't want the entire area around it. That would be taking your entire backyard. Fuhu amar lo derech musar o mirma, and Ephron was either through trying to be particularly one of two extremes. Either he was trying to be nice, he was trying to be ethical by offering Avraham the whole field with the cave, or mirma, or maybe he was trying to do things deceptively. He wanted to extort Avraham for even more, so he said, let me give you the field too for even more money. Right? Ephron wanted to give him the entire area. Ephron volunteered that part of it. It would not be an honorable thing for Avraham to have a cave that belongs in somebody else's backyard, and that anytime he wanted to visit, he would have to ask permission and walk in. That wouldn't be so nice. So Ephron offers, either because he wants more money or because he thinks it's actually the nice thing to do, he offers him the entire field. Avraham took great joy in this. Avraham took tremendous joy in this, and therefore he agreed. He said, yeah, I'll take the entire field. But what we have here is this idea that the people of Ches, the Bnei Ches, they lost this legend. They didn't realize that Adam Rishon was buried there. Ephron had no idea, and that's why he was willing to part with it.
Ephron listed the price as 400 silver shekels.
Mm-hmm.
Would that mean that the people who lived there before Israel, before the Jews, used the shekel as a currency?
I would think so. I mean, shekel, it's important to realize, also means a weight. Back in those times, we call it the Israeli currency now a shekel.
Exactly.
And that certainly wasn't the shkelm they used back then. A shekel more communicates a weight of gold or of silver. So it's more likely that when they were talking in those terms, they weren't even talking in terms of the same coins that the Bnei Yisrael used eventually also. And when we describe the Beis HaMikdash, when we describe the Mishkan also, we talk about the weight of something being 50 shekel. We don't mean that it was made out of coins. We mean that it had a certain weight of silver to it, or of gold, or whatever it is that we're talking about.
But Abraham knew he was buried there, right?
It seems to be the case that if we're trying to figure out why Abraham wants this land so much, like Rashi, like the Ramban mentioned earlier, Abraham says, "I'm taking this land, or I'm going to bury Sarah in a mausoleum." Right? He seemed to be very fixed on getting this. Right? So he seems to have known.
So would Hashem have told him? Like, how would he?
I presume that would be the case. The Ramban doesn't talk about that. I was curious as to why he doesn't. What exactly was? I think the bigger question is, forget how he knew about it, but why is that such a big deal to Abraham? Why would Abraham want that land so badly for himself? I mean, it's historically interesting that Adam Rishon is buried there.
There's a hint.
Yeah.
There's a hint that when the angels came to him, he gave them a bakar, right? And if you rearrange the words, it's kever. That's when he knew.
You want to say, and in exchange, the Malachim told him that secret? That's the
something
the
like
idea?
that. Yeah.
Could be. You said you were saying you had an approach?
The mausoleum would be an area where a loved one's body would be protected from the elements and whatnot. It wouldn't just be buried where there might be damage done to the grave or whatever, with the sandstorms and all the various things that they have. A cave also is a protective environment. So if he really, obviously wanted to protect his loved one and his family when they're buried, perhaps he thought burying them inside a cave, and then the burial would be there. People could visit and won't be destroyed, blown over, or whatever.
That shows the advantage of a cave, I think, right? But we have to understand why this cave specifically. Why was this cave more important than any of the other ones?
Were there a lot of other similar caves?
I would imagine that there's some other. If you go in Israel, there are other caves around, right, that existed. There would have been other options.
In his area, where he was residing?
Perhaps not. That could be. It's a possibility that he really wanted to have a place that was very permanent.
Or the Ottoman Chava.
Question I have is the 400 shekalim. previous readings I've done, it was apparently an exorbitant price.
Right.
And it wasn't that he was being such a wonderful person like it's made out for Ephron. He was actually was like a former usury.
So the Ramban gave two possibilities. He said either this was him being even more conniving, that he knew he was going to be able to rip Avram off. He saw Avram was desperate, so offer him even more property by which he can extort him even more.
Right.
That's one possibility. The other is that he saw that the field would be a nice thing to give as well, but at the same time, right, 400 shekalim, I think most of the commentaries assume, was a crazy price to give.
Yeah.
It seems clear that Abraham was buying more than he was buying mineral rights.
Right. And
he was simply buying a place there. He's conscious that this was a unique place and he would overpay for it in order to.
Right. He certainly does seem to think that.
He doesn't negotiate, really.
Right. Not at all. Sorry?
I heard it was like $1 million.
Let's say it was something like that. That would be a crazy amount even for an entire cemetery.
Right.
That would be a.
That would ensure that the Arabs would never claim that it was theirs, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Right, yeah.
It's interesting because the areas that we have some of the greatest claims on, based on all the stories that we have in Tanakh, those are actually the lands that are most contested. It's kind of ironic. But anyways, so something that Ramban does not address here is why Abraham wanted the land so badly because Adam HaRishon was there. Assuming that that's the reason, it wasn't because of a cave, that shows how it's a special place. But why is that a place specifically to bury the Avos and the Emos? And so he doesn't describe that. Maybe if we have some time, we'll talk about why that is later. But even just to say outside, because I know we want to finish before the COR program. So the next source, basically the Ramban, what he does is he explains how the sale took place in front of everyone. And Abraham made sure that the sale was done in its fullest possible extent. That, like we mentioned, Ephron offers it, let me give it to you as a gift. What's a big deal? Just that much money between you and me, even $1 million if that's what it was. Between those two, they were both extremely wealthy people, so why bother? But Abraham, nevertheless, he refused to take a gift here. Right? He absolutely wanted to purchase it because he didn't want to have any claims from the opposition that perhaps one day they'll say, no, this land isn't really yours, it was only a gift. Your acquisition of it was faultier in some way. So the Ramban makes sure to really make it clear, and the Psukim themselves, if you read them carefully, confirm this, that the purchase was done in the most yashar, straightforward, honest manner. That Abraham made sure to give all the money immediately to him in front of everybody in the entire town, and only after that did he start burying Sarah. So that idea also, that's going to be relevant to this last part of the Ramban. So the Ramban now is finally going to tie everything together. He's going to talk about why exactly we have this story here. Why is this relevant to us? So in Pasuk Yud Test, the last entry here. Why do we have this entire section? It was to teach us the kindness that God did for Abraham. Chaya nasi Elokim ba'aretz asher lagor sham. It teaches us that Abraham was indeed a prince of God in that land that he lived in. The entire nation, the Bnei Ches, they all called him my master. If you look at the entire exchange back and forth, you would think Abraham would, in honoring them, he would call them Adoni, right? You guys are my masters as well. He doesn't do that. It's to show this idea that Abraham was in fact royalty at this stage in his life. And through this story, we see the fulfillment of God's promise that we had earlier in Parshas Lech Lecha, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to Abraham, "I'm going to make your name great. You're going to be a source of blessing." Right. So this is an important theme in the Ramban. He very often will tell you that the reason why we have certain stories in Torah are because they confirm nevuah. The Ramban he views as a goal of the Torah very often. The reason why certain miracles are revealed to us and certain other miracles aren't, the reason why we have certain stories like we have here is because these stories show very clearly that nevuah is true and that God does in fact communicate with people that have reached certain levels. And here we have that being established. If you went through, if the story had ended and HaKadosh Baruch Hu basically telling Avram, "I'm going to make your name great," but then the story continues and all we have is Sarah died and Avram buried her, we wouldn't know that Avram actually reached that stage of greatness. Right? We know that Avram spiritually was a giant based on all of the stories that we have beforehand, but there's no story anywhere here that indicates that everyone respected Avram, that they viewed him as a king in their midst. So this story confirms that. And the Ramban is making it very clear that one of the purposes here was to show that nevuah took place, that it was fulfilled. So another reason, V'ishto Mesa v'nikbara b'nachal has Hashem, that Avram's wife was buried peacefully. V'od ki ratza l'hodienu makom k'vuras ha'avos. More importantly, and not more importantly, but this is obviously something that we make use of very heavily when we try to figure out what's going on in Israel, various locations, what happened in these places. So the Torah is telling us this is the location where your forefathers are buried, and that itself is important. It's coming to teach us that we are in fact obligated to pay honor to them in these places. And my Rabbi Rav Neuberger, he pointed out this is actually a chiddush. We might not have thought this necessarily. If you think, I mean, it's hard to imagine because we live our lives, obviously, visiting Kivrei Tzadikim, visiting graves of righteous ones, praying there, and having great honor for their grave sites. We treat a grave, we treat a dead body with much respect. But you would have not necessarily thought that based on the rest of Jewish thought, because typically the way we assume a person's life really has meaning is based on the actions they do, based on their neshama. And when a person passes away, all that's left is a shell. I remember there was a time when I was doing Shmira. This was for my father actually, and an individual who was a good friend of my father, he told me, a sheet on my father's body, so I didn't see anything, but he told me, realize that what's over here is not your father. At first I was very surprised. I had no idea what he meant, that this was somebody else, but then he went on to explain to me that this is just the shell. This is the body that he used in his lifetime, but who he is essentially, his neshama, that's in Shemayim, that's in Gan Eden. And the message he was trying to confirm for me, and that he was trying to communicate to me, and it was something that I definitely needed to hear at that time, was that he was in a better place, and then that what I saw before me was not really him, right? But along those lines, that's what Jewish thought believes, that the neshama, that's what's truly of importance. You would then think that a dead body, it's not something really to pay much attention to. It's just the shell. It's not of any importance. So we see here a chiddush itself from this story, the idea that within Jewish thought, even though we generally value the neshama alone, the body itself, and knowing where the bodies of our forefathers are and where our other ancestors are, that's something relevant. That's something that's important. That is in some ways, when we go to those places, that provides a connection to our previous generations itself. Even though we generally associate with their deeds and the things that they did and the more ruchnius aspects of their lives, still having that I guess physical connection to them is something that's relevant. So that's another message here. And then there's one more. Sorry, we read that one already. Our rabbi said in Baba Basra, another reason we're being told this story is the Chazal tell us is that this was the last test. This is the last test of Avram Avinu. If you look at various counts of what Avram Avinu's 10 trials were, right? I think many of them end with the Akedah. Right? That's viewed as the ultimate. Here we're learning something drastically different. There's a viewpoint within Chazal that apparently this was the last test, and along the lines of what we mentioned last week. If you were here, we talked about Nisayon as something that builds a person, makes them stronger when they experience it. So apparently, according to that reasoning, this was the hardest test. Why would this be harder than the Akedah? Any thoughts? Seems to be much less of a deal.
Because he was responsible for the death of his wife. He could have been responsible for the death of his wife.
So that is one approach that I've heard. I think if you actually look at the very first pasuk, I think of the parsha. Sorry, the second pasuk, it says liv kosa, that Avram wept over Sarah, right? And there the chaf in the word there is small. Right? So I think some explain that small letter to give over the idea that Avraham felt he felt sad about this whole thing, but at the same time we make a little chaf to demonstrate that he didn't feel sad in some way. And they explain that meaning that Avraham Avinu didn't want to feel too much guilt over this. And why didn't he? Because there isn't a concept, and we don't think about it too much. But tshuva, just like you could have tshuva for doing averos, a person can regret having done certain things, bad things, and therefore if they do their tshuva out of love, all of those averos turn into mitzvos, or at the very least the person has achieved forgiveness from Hashem. There's also tshuva for mitzvos. If a person regrets having done a certain mitzvah, that person in fact can lose his credit for it. If he says, I wish I hadn't done this. If Avram Avinu had said, the Akedah led to Sarah's death, I wish I hadn't done the Akedah. I wish I would have failed that test. So that itself would have negated everything accomplished. So Chazal, I think, tell us that this small cup is to teach that even though Abraham cried, and he was certainly sad that Sarah had passed away, he in some ways wanted to indicate that his crying was not out of regret of what happened, but that he's upset as to what a result of those actions were.
The continuing of that pasuk, Vayakam Abraham me'al pnei me'ei, me'so. He rose up. He rose up from before his death.
That would similarly indicate a certain.
He grew. He grew from the experience.
Very interesting. From what the experience of the hesped of the
hesped of that he grew from that. So therefore he couldn't have had charata.
Right. That would work very nicely. But I think another thing, I think the Chasam Sofer says this, the idea that a reason you could suggest this is a very difficult test is specifically because the Akedah right before it was such a hard test. I mean, when you experience something like that, it's very easy. We've never experienced anything remotely like this, but you can imagine Avram Avinu achieving what we view as the height of spiritual achievements, being able to totally surrender to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. He could have a certain sense that he's made it at that point.
Hashem told him he made it.
Hashem even told him, right?
He said, now I know you're it.
Now I know. Right, very good. Hashem even confirmed.
He told him that, and he promised him all the land.
As he had promised him before that and before that.
Having aggravation finding a place to bury his wife. He owns all the land.
Very good. Yes. This is a time where Avram should really feel more than ever before that everything should be coming to him. He's earned everything at this point, right? More than he's earned it before. And now all of a sudden, even though he gets tremendous cooperation from the children of Ches, right? They all want to help him out. But still, as we've noted, Ephraim gives him a hard time with this. He wants to give it to him in a way that it's not really a land which Ephraim could have a true claim to. Apparently, charges him an exorbitant fee. And there's a lot of back and forth here that you don't think Avram should have to deal with, right? Especially because, like we said, he's been promised the land. So the Chasam Sofer says that this was actually the hardest test, because even after you've passed such a great one, like the Akedah, you have to make sure that nevertheless you remain humble, that you maintain your composure, not only because because he just went through the Akedah and still he's facing all this. We have to remember also, it's pretty stressful to lose a wife. That itself is a big deal. Itself is a time where a person might not be of the most calm demeanor. Yet Abraham was. He went through all the motions with Ephron, and he managed to get the land in a way in which not only he did it peacefully, but he got it in such an honest way that he had true ownership over it, and he was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem to everyone that was watching. But that itself could demonstrate why it was maybe even a bigger test than the Akedah itself.
The nature of his test consistently, and not really his ability to do the action. His ability to do the action when God has set up something that just doesn't make sense. You brought me to the land so there's a famine. Why? You gave me this son so I could kill him. Why? You gave me the land and I can't bury my wife. Why? So all the way through, his test is not to ask why. And he doesn't. And even after all these things,
even when doing everything right,
after he's done everything right, and God has told him, I know you're the one. Right? God has like one more up his sleeve, right? Which is, you think you got it? I gave you all the land. You don't have a place to bury it. You're going to have to go ask a pagan to make a deal with you so you can give your wife honor.
Absolutely.
And again, he doesn't ask the question, why are you doing this to me?
He doesn't go to tantrum. He doesn't do anything.
Defining quality.
Very good. Absolutely.
That's the action. He doesn't ask the question.
Absolutely. And it's a lesson. I think this is the last real story where Abraham is center stage. After that, you have the side role he plays with regards to the finding of a wife for Yitzchak later on in the parsha. That's really it for Avram, and it would seem to be that would make a lot of sense with regards to the idea that this was the final test. At this point, this is the last thing that we can actually learn from Avram at the highest level that he's reached. After that, he's reached perfection, and after that, there's not really much more to gain from looking at what goes on with his life. If there were more tests, if there were more things to see, we'd hear about them. But that we end here, I think, is indicative of the fact that why do we have all these stories about him? They're really to teach us things. They're really to have us learn how to act, how to live, and this is the last time Abraham does something that's really a teaching moment for us, that it's very fitting that this ends his part of the Bereshis saga. So we'll end here. All right.